Okay, in the previous video, I gave you a broad overview of how to access Glitch, which is kind of like a glorified JS bin. I gave you a broad overview of sort of JSON and AJAX and how that helps you pass data, small packets of data back and forth between a server and a client using a notation that's very similar to custom objects. And then we also built the login page. And then once you logged in, it redirects you to this page. So the next task, of course, is we have to build this page where we can actually select books, and then the page where we can view the shopping cart. Um, Notice actually that the logout page already works. If you click on logout, it'll take you back to the login page. And that's because in the Bookstore API, well, first of all, the logout page, if we look at the URL here, it's just requesting logout. And in the server, the API already specifies what happens. Because if you go to the API here and you look at logout, it just returns the index.html page, which is the login page. So actually, let's just test that real quick. So if we click logout, it takes us back here. Let's click login. We actually need to get rid of this alert. We get the little message, and then 3 seconds later, it takes us to the select books page. Now in the select books page, again, it's all pretty much, a lot of it's created for you. You already have the basic elements. And this is where we actually have to populate the books. So we're going to request an array of book objects from the server. Those will be, sent back to the client, and then we have to sort of process those and display them here. And if we go now to the select products page and look at the actual code, we have the buttons up here, and then we have the select books, and then we have these two divs down here, and this is where we're actually going to put the actual books. And when the page is actually loaded, it calls the getBooks method, and this is what we need to add to the client JS to actually request the books from the server. So let's do that next. Let's look at the API. What are we going to need to use to actually call this? So getBooks returns an array of JSON book objects. And if we actually look at it demoed in apart from just giving it to the API, of course, I demo these. If we go here, we can look at getBooks, click on getBooks, and notice that what's being returned here is an array of book objects. So this is one book, yeah, and here's another book, and they're in an array. And then, of course, they have these attributes. So let's look at the source code and find getBooks and copy and paste this in to select, not select products, but client.js. Copy and paste that in. And notice what it's doing is getBooks is just making a request to the server, and then the server returns the books, and then it's just going to display them in an alert. Let's see what happens now when we run that. If we go back here, and we get the alert with all. So now it's actually when the page loads, it's making the request with, and the array of objects is returned. Our challenge now is to process that returned array of objects and display them right here in this div. So how do we do that? So the way we can do that is we can add a display books function, which we're calling here, and then adding it here, and then we're populating just to start with, so we can get a sense of what we're doing. We're targeting the books ID, uh, which is right this field here. Um, and then we're just populating it with the books array of books objects. And let's just see what that looks like. I mean, it's not gonna give us exactly what we need, but at least you get a sense of that we're moving in the right direction. So let's log in. Now you get the alerts. Now you get the array of book objects, and then they're being populated in that div. Of course, they're not displaying in the right way, and that's because we have to iterate through the objects, with a for loop, and access each of the appropriate book object properties. So let's do that next. Okay, so now I've added the code in the display books method. And let's just test whether it's working. So now if we go here, log in, and we get our table. Okay, so what's going on? What did I add to this function? First of all, we clear out the books div just so that it's empty. And then we looked in the books array that books array of objects that was returned, make sure there was nothing, that there's something in there. If not, we would display this message. You should never get it. Then we're building a book table variable that contains a table with the appropriate head. Stuff at the top of the table. And then I'm iterating through the actual array of books here. And if the book has been selected, I'm putting a check mark in that particular row of the table, cell of the table. If not, I'm leaving it empty. Then I'm populating the rest of the row with the ISBN, with the author and the title, etc., and adding the appropriate other information to build the actual row and cells in the table. And then I close the table here. And of course, I'm always adding all of this to the book table variable, and then I add the book table variable back to the div right here. And so that's basically how the display books function works in conjunction with the get books function to actually display the appropriate books. Now there is one additional little thing going on here, because when you select books, you should be able to click here and notice that when I do that, I'm getting a reference error. So you should be able to select or put items in the cart by clicking here, and I'm clicking here and I just get errors. Okay, so when I'm building the table, I've added this onClick method in that first cell of each row, and I'm calling the modify cart method. So we actually also have to write this method. And so what modify cart is doing, every time we know conceptually what it's doing, but what it's also doing behind the scenes is when we click on modify cart, it sends a little packet of data to the server. It's just specifying, it's a little JSON object that specifies the ISBN number, and then specifies whether it has an attribute called modify, which is saying add, and then the server responds with success equals true if it was able to process the request server side. If we click this again, notice that what's sent to the server is, instead of modify modify being add, it's now remove. So let's get that code working. Let's go back to client.js and add a modify cart method. And what the modify cart method is doing is first you're passing in the actual element that you clicked on, because it's sending this across. And then we're building a little packet of data that we're going to send to the server. So here's the empty JSON object, and we have to figure out with its attributes, the ISBN number, and then where the modify attribute, we have to decide whether this is add or subtract. We know what the ISBN attribute is by looking at the element.id, which is passed in by this, right? This sends the a reference to the element over in the method, and then it can access the ID, which is right here. So we have the ID, and then we look to see whether the cell was checked or not to decide whether the modify attribute should be add or remove. And then in addition, we have to toggle it. So if it was checked, if it wasn't checked, we have to put a check in the cell, and if it wasn't checked, we take it out. So now that the JSON object has been created, or the object has been created, then we can call the fetch method, and just copy and paste this code in as is. Leave out this comment. I should really get rid of it. And you don't need to know what this is, but basically what this is doing is converting the cart message object, which we have here, into a JSON string, which can then be sent to the server. And then we're actually sending it to the server and the rest of these statements here, and looking for the appropriate response. We don't do much with the response. If there was an error, then we call the message and put in a message. And ordinarily you won't see this code run, but if the server isn't responding, or if you've sent the wrong URL, then you would populate the message field. And so we can actually test that by actually corrupting the URL right here. And now if we run this again and log in, and now if we click this, we get error unexpected token in JSON at position 0. It's a cryptic message, but it's basically an indicator that something's wrong in our request to the server. We could actually probably look in sources as well. No, I mean network, and also see, see it's red, so it's saying that that something's wrong in the way we've posted it. So let's go back and clean it up and put in the original modify cart and just ensure that it's running correctly now. And so now everything is working fine. Now, really at this point, having shown you how to actually shop for books and how to log in, you should probably be in a good enough position to be able to build the View Shopping Cart page. But depending on the semester, I'll show you also how to build that as well in the next video if it's made available to you.